But in your hands I can be anything. Just one touch from the potter could change everything. 'Cause you have the ability to see what man can't see. So Lord, I'm just a clay. God, just have your way and make me more like you. 'Cause you are the potter, and I am the clay. Won't you mold me, shape me? You are the potter, and I am the clay. Won't you mold me, shape me just like you? Ooh, just like you, just like you, just like you. Not much in your hands, I can make anything. Just one time from the point I can change anything. You are the pie, I am the clay. We can mold me, shape me. You are the pie, I am the clay. Won't you mold me, shape me just like you, just like you. Wanna be more like you, just like you. Wanna be more like you, just like you. Make me unholy till I look like you. Hold away my broken edges, be new. Make me unholy till I look like you. Through my cracks and mistakes, you don't throw me away. You make all things new. Make me unholy till I look like you don't throw me away, you It's a grateful he won't throw you away. Lift those hands and begin to worship this mighty God. Come on. He loves you too much to walk away. He loves you too much to give up on you. He's the Father, and he specializes in putting broken things back together again. Say, hallelujah. From the beginning to the end today. Say it's all in your hands now. It's all in your hands now. I need you to make me new. It's all in your hands now. It's all in your hands now. Say, I lift my praise now.
High Praise Church and all of our family and friends that are here tonight for our Wednesday night Bible study. I thank God for you being here. As a matter of fact, I just want to welcome everybody to our home, not just the physical home, but to the presence of God and us as a family of God being here together to sit and to learn and to hear what God is teaching us tonight. I thank God for my family who always encourage me. They always tell me, Mama, you can do it. You got this, you can do it. And I'm like, ah. And then for my husband who always encourages me and said, baby, you got this, you can do this. You know, this is what you called to. He reminds me of the calling that God has on my life, and I appreciate him for that. And I thank God for allowing me to sit here before you, for helping me and for teaching me so that I can teach you. I thank God for it. Let's start with a word of prayer. Father, I thank you for being here. I thank you for your presence in this place and in our lives. I pray, Father, that you will open thou our eyes that we may see wondrous things in thy law, so that, God, we will know you better. Help us to hear from you tonight, learn of you tonight, and worship you all the more. In Jesus' matchless and wonderful name, amen. Last week, Pastor Cooper did such an incredible job on Matthew chapter 23, and that last point just blew me out of the water when he was dealing with the Pharisees and the false prophets and all of those. I was just so blessed last week, and I thank God for his teaching. Tonight, we're going into Matthew chapter 24, the signs of Christ's coming, part 1, the background. This is so incredible, guys. I hope you brought a pencil and paper or typing on your laptop or your notebook or whatever, because has revealed some things to me, and I want to really share this with you. Matthew 24, verses 1 through 3, the New Living Translation is what I'm going to read for you right now. Give you a second to get it. If you don't have the New Living Translation, you can follow me with any translation. Matthew 24 says, as Jesus was leaving the temple grounds, his disciples pointed out to him the various temple buildings. But, verse 2, but he responded, do you see all these buildings? I tell you the truth, they will be completely demolished. Not one stone would be left on top of another. Verse 3, later Jesus sat on the Mount of Olives. His disciples came to him privately and said, tell us, when will this happen? What sign will signal your return and the end of the world? We'll start the study of Matthew chapter 24 with verses 1 through 3 by putting them in 4 parts. The first part is going to be the prophetic expectations in Judaism. The second part, prophetic discussions with Jesus. The third part, near the temple. And the fourth part, in the conclusion of the night on the mount. See, Jesus' message in Matthew 24 and Matthew 25 is commonly known as the Olivet Discourse. And you say, why? Where would that name come from? It's really just came from because Jesus delivered this message to them. He answered the question that they asked on the Mount of Olives. And that's why it's called that. The theme of this Olivet Discourse is Christ's second coming at the end of the present age to establish his millennial kingdom on earth. And you know what's funny, because so many people want to know, when is Jesus coming back? I've been waiting. I thought he was going to come back when I was a little kid. I thought he was going to come back then. I've been trying to get ready, but he ain't came back yet. What is really, really going on? So let's walk into this tonight and just get started on the signs of his coming, okay? This message from the mountain was prompted by the disciples, by the questions that they asked in Matthew 24:3, when they said, tell us, when will all this happen? What sign will signal your return and the end of the world? This answer that Jesus gave, you guys, is the longest answer to any question, any parable, any of that in the whole New Testament. It's the longest, and its truths, get this, its truths are absolutely essential for understanding his return and the amazing events associated with his return. It's absolutely essential. That means you got to get this. You need this part to help you understand about the return of Christ. It is the revelation of our Lord out of his own lips about his return to earth and to earth in glory and power. See, the teaching of this Olivet discourse is much debated, and is frequently misunderstood. And the reason why is because of some theological teaching. Uh, when people don't understand things, sometimes they try to make it so deep that you can't get it. And that wasn't Jesus' plan. He didn't want it to be interpreted like it was some complex, enigmatic, which means mysterious or difficult to understand. Just like I said that word, and you may not have known what that was. And you'd have been like, enigmatic, what is that? And I just told you, it is something that is mysterious or difficult to understand. That's not the way Jesus set this up. He knew that the disciples weren't learned people. And that doesn't mean they were dumb. That means they weren't highly educated. They weren't like the Pharisees who knew all the laws backwards and forwards, and the Sadducees and the scribes and all those people. They weren't like them. Some of those people, it cost to get educated. And so people like the disciples who were not, didn't have that upper education, they were going to work on fishing boats when they were kids. They were learning to count by counting fish and doing things like that. They didn't have that huge education like some other people did. So Jesus wasn't delivering this message in complexity. He wasn't delivering it for people who were highly educated to use huge words. Nope. He didn't want to leave them dumbfounded. He preferred them to learn in a simple, easy way. And so that's the way this is. That's the way it's set up. So we're going to roll into from that into the cultural of Judaism. So the cultural, and those of you who know me know that I like to give the history of things so that you can get an understanding of what needs to be known, what needs to be said, what needs to be done, so that you can know where these things are coming from. So cultural Judaism, I'm going to give you a little background on what the Jews or the Hebrews, which are the same thing, what they learned or what their religion was like, okay? Judaism is a monotheistic religion developed among the ancient Hebrews. Now, monotheistic, I'm getting ready to tell you what it is. Judaism is characterized by a belief in one transcendent God. One God, no other God. There is no other God other than the God that we worship and the one we serve. So that's what they believed. They believed that this God revealed himself to Abraham and Moses and the Hebrew prophets, and by a religious life in accordance with the scriptures and rabbinic traditions. Rabbinic is like the rabbis or the teachers of that day. They were the teachers. So it was some traditions that they had. Judaism is a complex phenomenon of a total way of life. Complex not meaning difficult, but meaning many parts. A total way of life for the Jewish people, comprising theology, law, innumerable cultural traditions. The people of Israel believed that their response to the divine presence in history was central not only for themselves but for all humankind, meaning that they believed that this would work for all people, not just them, for everybody, every human. Furthermore, God as a person had revealed a particular encounter, the pattern and structure of communal and individual life to his people. Basically, it's saying God revealed himself to his people in individual lives, in their lives, and as individuals, and even as a group. He claimed sovereignty over his people because of his continuing action in history. Over and over and over, you can go back and read in history books, real history books, about this God that we're talking about tonight, about the true and the living God. History books, they would say the God of the Jews, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, the God of Moses. They would point it out because they could see through history where God did things in the lives of these people, and how if you mess with God's people, he didn't play that. He would roll a Red Sea up on you. If you mess with his people, he did not play that. He would cross waters and cause tornadoes to keep you from getting to his people. He was taking care of his people, and people recognized that. So his continual action in history showed his divine presence, and that his presence was manifested through the people's lives in their obedience to God. They saw that and they said, this is interesting. This kind of God is not like the ones we worship. This God is like a true God. Like, we can see what he's doing. God wasn't sacrificing their kids to do stuff. He didn't need that. They weren't dropping he didn't need you to drop a person in a volcano just to try to get riches or whatever. He wasn't like that. So they recognized that he was different. And the Jews also recognized that they were the chosen community in concrete human existence. You could see them, they were touchable. The corporate life of the community was a summons to let the rest of mankind know, humans know, that God's existence was real, and that he was sovereign, and he had purpose, and the establishment of peace and well-being in the universe and in humankind. He was revealing himself through people. Now, I'm going to read this because I taught this part right here in Matthew chapter 17. And it's very important to what we're going to say tonight about what the Jews believed in the Judaism religion. So follow with me. I'm going to Matthew chapter 16 right now, verse 27 and 28. Remember the prophecy at the Mount of Transfiguration. Matthew 17 and 1. Remember that prophecy, okay? The New International Version of Matthew chapter 16, verse 27 and 28 says, "For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each person according to what they have done." Verse 28, "Truly, I tell you," this is what Jesus was telling them, telling his disciples, "Truly, I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." So they had this prophecy and they knew Jesus gave them this prophecy at the Mount of Transfiguration before they went up the mount. So in today's time, God's people have grown accustomed. They've grown accustomed to waiting long periods of time for a prophecy to be given. However, it was not uncommon for an Old Testament prophecy to combine a prophecy from a far distant one with one that was in the near future. And this is what is taking place in Matthew chapter 24. This is what's taking place. These things have been prophesied. I'm getting ahead of myself from before. And in the Old Testament, it was kind of put together. So they were expecting things to happen in a different way. They were expecting it to happen all together, and that's not what was happening. So with an earlier prefiguring to the latter, the fulfillment of the near prophecy served to verify the reality of the distant prophecy. And I'm going to give you an example in just a minute here. It seems reasonable, therefore, to assume that Jesus verified his reliability of his second coming prophecy by giving them a glimpse of his second coming with the disciples, in which he told them that some of them weren't going to taste death. Now, there was 12 disciples when he told them that. And he says, some of you are not going to taste death. That means some of you aren't going to die until you're not going to die before you see the Son of Man coming in his Father's glory. So this is going to happen. That's what it meant. This is going to happen. And this is the distant prophecy. Verse 28 Verse 28 says, "Truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming." This is the near prophecy. Taste death was a common Jewish expression that referred to drinking the cup of death, or basically dying. Jesus assured the 12 that before some of them died, they would see him coming in his kingdom. Because all 12 disciples are dead now. They've been dead a long time. And Jesus hasn't come back yet for his second coming. So what happened? What's going on here? It's been 2,000 years and he hasn't come back. So all these people died. Why? You said this. What actually happened on the Mount of Transfiguration when he took Peter, James, and John, missing somebody. When he took them up the mountain, he went up the mountain. They're making fun of me. When he took them up the mountain, they saw the transfiguration. And this is what, let me break it down to you. So let me show you what it meant. They saw Jesus and in his glory. So where was I? You think either Jesus was lying or he was mistaken, and he can't do neither. He couldn't do either. So his prophecy was actually true. And it was actually, he was talking about his second coming, but he was showing them something. Here, but Jesus began his but because Jesus is incapable of either lying or being mistaken, it should be obvious. It is obvious that he was not saying that some of them would not die physically before his actual second coming. To understand correctly what Jesus meant, it is first of all helpful to know that basileia, which is the Greek word for kingdom, was often used as a minatome, meaning it can be used in a different way to mean royalty or regal splendor. In much the same way that we use the word scepter, we could say somebody has the scepter of this, means that they have the power, the royal power, they have the control or the authority of something. It was used in that way, basileia refers to the manifestation of Jesus' kingliness rather than literal earthly reign. You get that? See, this is why Bible study is important. Because Pastor Cooper teaches us that on Sundays when he tells us, he's like, yeah, like remember when he told us when the Bible said, Jacob I've loved and Esau I've hated, and he let us know that it didn't mean that he hated him and he despised him. It just means he preferred to use him in this situation over using that one. So it didn't mean what we realize, what we think of it as hate. Like, we think, oh, I can't stand you. You just gross me out or whatever. It didn't mean that. So that's why Bible study is important. So when Jesus said he was coming back in his kingdom, that they were going to see him, and he was coming back, they thought that it meant that they were going to live forever. He had explained to them, no, that's not what's going to happen. And they saw that in the transfiguration, on the Mount of Transfiguration. So it meant that he was coming in his kingly splendor, not that he was coming, that was his second coming. In light of the interpretation, because all three Gospels accounts promise the seeing of his glory is given immediately preceding the account of the transfiguration. And it can be translated as royal splendor. It seems that Jesus must, in this instance, have been referring specifically to his unique and awesome transfiguration, Peter, James, and John, that they saw only 6 days later. Those three disciples were the sum among the 12. So when Jesus said the sum of you, he didn't say all 12 of you, he said some of you. And those three disciples were the sum of you that were not going to die before they saw this miraculous preview that they would see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. The glory Jesus promised some of his disciples is without a doubt in reference to the Mount of Transfiguration. So prophecy is not always the way we think it when you look at it in the Bible. I'm going to go here. I'm going to tell you the prophetic expectations of Judaism, because some people think, and they say, well, they knew Jesus was going to do that. Well, see, they didn't have the whole story like we do. They didn't know actually everything that was going on. They were trying to follow Jesus and what he was telling them. And some of the things were difficult to understand because they were like, hold on. And you're gonna see in a minute when I get to that part, they were like, wait a minute, I don't understand this. And that's why they would go to Jesus and they would, thank you, Holy Ghost. They would go to Jesus and they would ask him questions. They would say, well, what do you mean by this? And we can do that today. We can go get in our quiet space, or sometimes we don't even have to be in the quiet space, and God will just reveal it to us and say, God, what does this mean? Help me out here. Give me understanding. What is going on here? In order to understand the disciples' question on this occasion, it is necessary, it is imperative, it is important to know something about the basic hopes and aspirations of Judaism of that day. So you got to know what they were looking for.
That's good.
It's different. When you know what people were doing, what they were looking for, it's different from what we were looking for, what we look for now. It's totally different because we have the whole Bible. They hadn't even written the New Testament yet. And we have what they had. Now we get to see a bigger picture. And so remember, and I said this earlier, the historical setting is always an important key to the context. People can say things and take things out of context, and we don't want you to do that. You got to know the setting and what was going on in that day and time. Throughout history, even today, people have wanted to know the future. They have been like, oh, what's going to happen? People want to know what's going to happen before the end of the movie. I have a daughter that loves to read and will read the end of the book before she reads the first page. She wants to know what's going to happen. Now, I wouldn't read the book if I found out what was going to happen on the last page. I'm like, I don't care. I already know what's going to happen. No matter what's going on between. But people would scroll forward to the end of the movie or whatever, or do like she does and just read the last few pages and then go back and start in the beginning. I don't understand. But people have always wanted to know the future. I used to be the person that would say, I want to know what I'm getting into before I get into it. I always had a whole lot of questions. I used to get hit in my mouth a lot from my mom. She would be like, pop me in my mouth. Stop talking. Because I always wanted to know what was coming. I wanted to know what was coming. And a lot of people are like that. Back there in those days, they had a strong desire to know the future, and just like we do today. And in our societies, we still have them. We have seers and mediums and fortune tellers and prognosticators, which is a person who foretells the future, which is not necessarily, it's alleged truth, but not really the truth. And most of them are deceitful. And some of them even are demonic. These futurists have offered gullible ideas and inquiries to people just to tell them things, some of them do it for money. Some of them just lie and just tell you about it. We want to know what lies ahead. Although the Mosaic law forbade people from going to mediums and witches and warlocks to try to know the future, God said, no, don't do that. And he said no then, and it's the same no today. Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 9 through 14 says, when you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you, be very careful not to imitate the detestable customs of the nations living there. That goes for today too. When you start the people around you, you have to be very careful not to imitate the detestable things that they do. Verse 10, for example, never sacrifice your son or your daughter as a burnt offering. And that would be something that Rachel would probably say, does somebody really have to tell you not to do that? Why would somebody do that? You have to be told not to do that? Come on now. But he had to tell people because that's what they were doing. And then he said, and do not let your people practice fortune telling or use sorcery or interpret omens. That's like the Ouija board. Interpret omens or engage in witchcraft or cast spells or function as mediums and psychics or call forth spirits of the dead. Verse 12 says, anyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord. It is because the other nations have done these detestable things that the Lord your God will drive them out ahead of you. Because they were doing that foolishness, God said, nope, they're getting out of here. Their lives are over. They're done. And he said, but you must be blameless before the Lord your God. The nations you are about to displace consult sorcerers, fortune tellers, but the Lord your God forbids you to do such things. And I'm telling you these things because these things happen today. I'm telling you these things because you have to recognize this is what we do in our behavior and our obedience to God displays who God is. So when we are not obeying God, we're not our light, his light is not shining through us. So he wants his light to shine through us so people can see that we are different. And it's okay for us to be different. We godly different. We're not weird, but we godly different. The Israelites frequently fell prey to that. And some people say, oh, they so dumb. If I was back then, I wouldn't do this and I wouldn't do that. And some people are doing that today. They call them the psychic hotline. They trying to figure out what the future is and inviting spirits into their lives and into their homes and don't even realize it. And then things start going wrong. They're like, what happened? Well, this is what happened. God is telling us this to protect us.
Right.
Not to keep us from having fun. There's no fun in this. He's protecting us from inviting demons to come rest in our lives and into our homes. And just like Saul did, Saul consulted the medium of Endor in 1 Samuel chapter 28 and also in 2 Kings chapter 21. He consulted a witch and he knew that he wasn't supposed to be doing that. So definitely he got in trouble with God. There's no evidence that the Jews in Jesus' day were guilty of Saul's offense, but they could have been, as many people still have that interest today. Now, I'm going here in the midst of telling you still some of the things that they learned in Judaism and that they expected to come to pass. The Mishnah, which is a book that was the first major written collection of the Jewish oral traditions that are known as the Oral Torah. It reveals some of the cultural prophetic expectations in Judaism. And I'm going to give you a short list. I didn't get to put them all in, but just some things. They expected this to happen before the coming of the Messiah. Arrogance increases. Ambitions shoot up. The government turns to heresy. There is no instruction. There is no foundation, no boundaries. There's no instruction. No one wants to hear the teaching. Does that sound like today to you? The synagogue is devoted to lewdness. Is that the way some of our churches have been? Galilee is destroyed. The inhabitants of a district go from city to city without finding compassion. We have an issue. The Bible says that the love of many will wax cold when it gets close to the end times. It'll get worse and worse. It's hard to find compassion anywhere nowadays. You have to go looking for it. Seriously. The wisdom of the learned is hated. People don't want wisdom. The godly are despised, and truth is absent. The real truth, the only truth, is absent because people are coming up with their own truth, using their own beliefs.
That's right.
Not really wanting to know the truth because they want to do what they want to do. Mm-hmm. Boys insult old men, and old men stand in the presence of children. They're unlearned. They're trying to be the young G. They're not standing in their rightful place as men, as the older men. They want to hang out like the younger guys, and the younger guys are insulting old men. Tell them they don't know anything. And when they're acting like that, they don't. They're old fools. The son depreciates the father. The daughter rebels against the mother. The daughter-in-law against the mother-in-law. And a man's enemies are his house fellows. The people, his family that live in his house have become his enemies. And that is happening so much today. It's happening in so many different ways. So many different ways. Number 2, prophetic discussions with Jesus. In all fairness, the disciples... to the disciples, the Old Testament prophets saw the Messiah's coming, his second coming, and his establishing the kingdom in a single event too. And that's the way they said it. But they didn't realize that they were telling that. They knew God gave them something to say. They didn't know the ins and outs of some of those things. Isaiah said, and he said in Isaiah, I think it's chapter 6, verse 9, where he said, a son will be born, a child will be born, a son will be given. And he said it'll shoot up like a root from Jesse. And he went on to say it was going to, a virgin will give birth to a child. And he went on to say, and all of that. And that was the prophecy of it. But he didn't know when he got to talking about the government will be upon his shoulders. He didn't know all the ins and outs of that. He just knew that Jesus was coming and that he was going to take control of governments and he was going to run things. So they expected that to happen right then. um, the church age, which age we're in now, was a mystery to people. They didn't understand. They didn't even know what that part of the prophecy was going to be like. It was a mystery, and it was a divine mystery. It was something that God did not reveal to them yet. He didn't tell them that until the time came. In Romans chapter 16, because Israel had no obvious experience of, wait a minute, Romans chapter 16, verse 25 through 36, Paul explained it was a mystery which had been kept secret for long ages past, but now is manifested. And here we are. It was kept secret. God didn't reveal to them what was going to happen, because if he did, they probably would have known Jesus wasn't coming back real quick like they anticipated. And because Jesus declared himself to be the Messiah, he declared himself in Israel, because Israel had obviously experienced tremendous tribulation. They knew tribulation was going to come. Jesus declared himself to be the Messiah. He identified John the Baptist as the forerunner. So he's putting it out there. He's taking the prophecies and he's putting them in line, and he's saying, this is what's happening, and I need you to see this. He said John the Baptist was the forerunner, and because he accepted the messianic acclaim of the people when they were saying, Hosanna in the highest, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. He accepted that because that's who he was. He did the acclaim. The disciples, understandably, they thought, okay, this is it. This is what's going to happen. He's getting ready to run roughshod over Rome. He's getting ready to take them out. We're getting ready to take control. So you can't look at this. In all fairness, you got to give them a break and see what they're looking at from their perspective, seeing what they were seeing. They were certain that Jesus' next move was going to be that he was going to demonstrate his great power over the nations, and that the nations would rise up against him, and Jesus was going to knock them down. It was doubtlessly such thoughts that gave Judas the superficially commitment to stay with Jesus. He expected he was going to be in the Messiah's inner court, his inner circle. When the kingdom was inaugurated, he was expecting he was going to get power, going to be given power and wealth and prestige with with that position. But we have to recognize, as Judas should have recognized, that it wasn't all about power. It wasn't about position, and it wasn't about wealth. If we're in it just for that, we're going to be sorely disappointed. People say, oh, I'm blessed. And if somebody say, what does that mean? What are you going to tell them? Oh, I got a car, I got a house, I got clothes, I got this. Blessed? Is that all it is? Blessed is having things? Being in the presence of God is the biggest blessing that there could ever be. Being blessed. It is an honor to sit in God's presence and to know him and to know that he's there. So it's more than just a position. Number 3, near the temple. Matthew 24, 1 and 2. As Jesus was leaving the temple grounds, his disciples pointed out to him the various temple buildings. But he responded, he said, do you see all these buildings? I tell you the truth, they will be completely demolished. Not one stone will be left on top of another. Jesus has spent all day Wednesday of the Wednesday of the Passover week in the temple, giving his last public teaching, as Pastor Cooper told us last week, and pronouncing his final and most intense judgment on the false religious leaders and on the nation of Israel. Now he was going away to the Mount of Olives. He was going to chill with his disciples. And as they were leaving Jerusalem, the disciples came and they pointed out to him. It was like, look, Jesus, look at these beautiful buildings. Now, I don't know if you've ever looked at a picture of Herod's temple. That's what it's called. Google that and look at a picture of it. That building had gold built into it. They had gold walls. Instead of using that brick and mortar stuff, they had gold inlaid, true gold, melted, laid it in there, stacked those stones on top of each other. They had ceilings of gold. The outside of the temple, there was gold on top of it. It was phenomenal. It was beyond beautiful. People came from all around just to see the temple of God. They saw that. And the disciples are pointed out in the other two gospels, the synoptic gospels as they're called. And the word synoptic just means that they said the same thing or they said it in similar ways. And they were pointing out how great this temple was. And the temple buildings, I got to tell you, because when I was looking at this, I'm thinking, we think we got architecture now. Those architects back then were incredible. The temple and it's a junk building stood on top of a mount. It was they built a massive retaining wall to not just keep the building in place, but even to steady the mount so it wouldn't shake. If there was an earthquake, it was gonna hold that temple in place. They were thinking way out of the box. At least that's the way I think. And it was a massive retaining wall on the south and the west side. And the temple was awe-inspiring. And I'm going to read this right here. They could not conceive how such an enormous structure could have been built or decorated so magnificently. The Roman historian Tacitus reported that it was a place of immense wealth. He said, the Babylonian Talmud said, he never saw a temple of Herod. If you never saw a temple of Herod, the temple of Herod, you've never seen a fine building. Some of the stones measured 40 feet by 12 by 12.
Wow.
40 feet. Now, the utility poles in the United States, that is their standard size for a utility pole is 40 feet. So you go out and you look at the utility pole, and you say, wow, that's high. But what maybe you don't know, is that 6 feet of that pole is in the ground. So what you're seeing is the top part. The top was that 34 feet. So the 34 feet that we see outside the ground is huge. Can you imagine a stone? A stone is 40 feet long and it's 12 by 12, 12 feet by 12 feet. Those stones weighed up to 100 tons apiece.
Wow.
And they were quarried at the place where they get the stones, and they were brought in one piece and a long distance. So I was trying to figure out who was carrying those and a long distance. The disciples were wondering how such an amazing edifice, especially one that was supposed to be glorified, that was supposed to glorify God, how could this be destroyed? Rachel and Elijah were telling me about a church that got struck by lightning. And they were telling me something about what the people in the church had said about God. I don't remember what it was. And then they get struck by lightning. So the disciples were trying to figure out why or how this temple that was honoring God was going to be destroyed. And they were just shocked. Maybe if they had gone back and remember what Ezekiel said in Ezekiel 11:23, when he said, the glory of the Lord went up from the city and stopped above the mountain to the east. The holy sanctuary that had once been God's house was no longer his. It is your house now. That's what Jesus said to the unbelieving Jews before he left the temple. He said, it is your house and it is being left to you desolate, which meant empty, void. It didn't mean it wasn't going to have things in it, but it was left to them void of God's presence. Because the glory of the Lord would soon depart from it. The beautiful buildings had been devoted for God's glory. It had been supposed to be an honor to God, and Jesus was supposed to be honored in it. But that's not what happened. I need you to know this. Prophecy on time for God. Prophecy according to man sometimes appears to be delayed. But it is God's plan and its purpose, his purpose. It's on time for him. Whenever he prophesies something, whenever it comes to pass, it wasn't delayed by somebody or something. It was on time. It was on schedule.
Amen. Amen.
Jesus, therefore, responded to the disciples that were admiring. You ever seen something so beautiful? You know, I used to drive through down off of State Line and Warnell and all those, and see all those huge mansions over there. And me and the kids, we would ride through there, just go riding and just marvel at them. And this temple was way. I'm sorry. They were cutting up, y'all. Where was I? Jesus said to them, he said, "Do you see these things? Truly I say to you, not one stone will be left upon another, which that will not, it will be torn down." The disciples' mouths must have fell open when he said that. They were probably like, what? They couldn't imagine how or why this was going to happen. Yet, that is exactly what happened. For less than 40 years later, it happened. Remember when I told you in the beginning when we first started about the prophecies, and that they all didn't always happen immediately. Some of them would happen. There would be a two-part prophecy. What do you know about God's promise to Abram and Sarah? He told them they were going to have a child, both of their loins. What was it? 15 years later, he had a son with Hagar. They didn't wait for God to manifest his prophecy. They wanted it now. Sarah encouraged her husband to do what he did, not waiting on God's prophecy. And what's awesome in the midst of that, God prophesied the coming of Christ back in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve. Way, way, way before Abraham was born. He prophesied that. He said he's going to come. And that he was going to be the one that destroyed Satan. That's what he said. Genesis chapter 3, verse 16. God prophesied that then, thousand years before. When the Romans sacked Jerusalem in AD 70 and they massacred most of the Jews, that's when they burned and destroyed, demolished the temple. And because of the gold that was inlaid, history has it that because of the gold that was inlaid, when they burned the temple, they scraped the gold off of each stone that was in the temple so that they could get the gold off. No stone was left on top of the other.
Wow.
They took all the gold off.
That's a lot of work, too.
That's a lot of work. A lot of money. But a lot of work. And Jesus knew that was going to happen less than 40 years later. But the disciples anticipated that it would happen right then. They were thinking that when Jesus kept saying, "You're going to die," he was going to be killed. They were like, wait a minute, but this hasn't happened yet. And they wanted this to happen. They were like, hold on, you can't die yet because this. They were anticipating. Peter said, "No, you're not going to die." He was willing to kill anybody that wanted to kill Jesus.
That's right.
He was going to go after them and did, cut off an ear, as a matter of fact. But that wasn't God's plan. The prophecy was different. It did not happen immediately. It happened later on. Josephus, who was a son of a priest, and he became a Pharisee, a military commander in the resistance with Israel. he became all of that, but he was more like our modern day journalist. He said this. Uh, he said, the only stones left intact were the huge foundational stones, which was the wall, the retaining wall, and it had nothing to do with the temple. It wasn't connected to the temple. And he said he commented on visiting the site after the destruction. He said that he could not believe. It was hard to believe that anyone had ever inhabited the place, much less that one of the most significant structures of the ancient world had stood there only a short while before. As a matter of fact, right now, where that temple was, there's a Muslim mosque there. They worship there. And they said it was put there uh, just to show, not just so that they can try to turn people to their God, but so that they can show their power over the religion. They had no idea that God was using them. And still to this day, shocked as they were, they realized the temple would be destroyed, talking about the disciples. They were no doubt disheartened, discouraged probably even, thinking that that event was going to be related to the expectations and the purification of Jerusalem that would occur later on. I mean, you got to come up with something. And so that's what they did. On the mount, Matthew 24:3. And he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, and the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? Upon leaving the temple, Jesus and the 12, they left Jerusalem through the eastern gate. They went through the Kidron Valley and they ascended to the Mount of Olives. And they traveled up. That was a short distance. And Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked that question. What's going to be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? When will this happen? For some time, the disciples had been convinced that the kingdom of God was going to appear immediately. Therefore, in the context of what Jesus was saying and the things that they were seeing happen, it implied that it was immediacy that was going to be, suggesting that it might be tomorrow or next week or next month, or maybe even the end of the Passover. These things were referred to Jesus, what Jesus had been talking about, namely the former house of God that will be desolate. The disciples were expecting the final stages of the Messiah's work to unfold rather quickly and take over and do all these things. But that's not what it was. They were anticipating, okay, so if this is what's going to happen with the temple, okay, then that's the purification for us taking over and the glorious kingdom coming, and God's going to rule and reign here. They said they wanted to know, what will be the sign of your coming? They wanted to know, what would be the first indicator? Do you want to know? Have you ever asked the question, when is Jesus coming back? They told me that when I was a little girl. They told me that when I was a teenager. My mama told me that they told her that when she was little. My dad said this. Jesus hasn't come back yet. What is really going on? They still understood the Messiah was coming. They understood that these events were going to transpire. They just didn't know it was going to be two comings. He was there, and he was going to come back later. Such a great darkness, they expected such a great darkness or a bright light, something brilliant was going to happen. Heavenly trumpets. They probably were excited and thinking this was going to happen like right now. His millennium kingdom was coming. Based on what Jesus said, the disciples believed that the next time the unbelieving Jews ran into Jesus, the next time they saw him and Jesus confronted them, they was going to fall down and say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. They thought this was going to happen. They was ready to see this. They were persuaded that it wasn't going to be that far off. Even after the resurrection, the disciples still held the same expectation. They thought he was coming right back. They thought this was getting ready to manifest. It was going to take place right then when he ascended. Lord, is it this time that you're going to restore the kingdom to Israel? That's what they said in Acts 16 before he ascended to heaven. Jesus' death and resurrection did not lessen their anticipation. And I have to say, that is incredible because sometimes we get so disappointed when we want them to happen that we just leave it, just walk away from it. But they kept their face to what Jesus told them, and they walked in faith, believing that he is coming back. And you guys, he is coming back. The coming that the disciples had in their mind, yep, the coming they had in their mind was not the second coming. They saw his coming just as the Old Testament's prophets predicted it, compressed, unbroken in a series of events that would occur in a short period of time. But remember what I told you, what I read you about in Matthew chapter 16 and chapter 17? There's parts of it. And we can't, wait till we get into this next week. We can't get caught up in what we hear. We have to know. We have to know that we're going to have to trust God on this. We have to know that. Okay, what will be the sign of your manifesting yourself in full? Your permanent presence as Messiah the King. They did not use parousia in the specific and technical sense that Jesus used it later in the chapter of the 24th chapter, and is often used elsewhere in the New Testament and referring to the second coming. They were not thinking of Jesus returning because they had no idea of his leaving, but they were thinking rather of his perfect messianic presence, which they expected him to manifest presently. The end. The end translates Santalia, a compound word that refers to completion and the final culmination of a planned series of events. And the disciples' mind, the end of the age would accompany Jesus' full manifestation. You know, like what we see in Revelation, where it says he's coming and he's coming and he's coming with the saints and they're wearing white robes and they're coming and they're going to take down the enemy. That's what they were expecting to happen right then. Yet they saw Jerusalem burned. They saw the temple burned. They saw thousands and thousands of people killed. The Romans killed a lot of people. And they saw that. And they were like, well, wait a minute. Now this is happening after Jesus is gone. He's already ascended to heaven. But they held to what he said. They held on to what he said. He used the phrase, Jesus used the phrase, the end of the age in the parable of the wheat and the tares, the parable of the dragnet. They were both cases that represented the gathering of the wicked by God's angels in preparation for judgment. He also used the phrase as the conclusion of the Great Commission when he told us to go out in the highways and the byways and compel the people to come in, assuring the disciples, lo, I am with you always, even until the end of the age. The disciples questioned about the ultimate end of the age, not simply the end of the era or an epic history, but the final end of the present world system of darkness and the sin and end they expected soon. It was also, of course, a question about the beginning of the new eternal age. You know, this is going to end and then heaven. We're going to have a heaven. And that wasn't it. They thought of the eternal age, of course, as a question of being the new and the eternal age of light, righteousness, truth, and justice. The ungodly would be forever damned, and the godly will be forever blessed. Isn't that what a lot of times we're looking for? We talk about heaven. Heaven. We're looking for no more tears. The Bible tells us there will be no more tears, no more pain, no more sorrow. It'll be life, and it'll be no evil there. when would that transpire? They wanted to know. And what sign would herald its activity? So that's the questions we have. And many of us have had them for a very long time. So next week, we are going to go in and we're going to talk about the signs of the coming, part 2. And we'll name that the birth pains. And we're going to have 9 parts of that. So we're going to get some understanding of the sign of the times and when it's coming. I thank God for you listening today. I thank God for giving me the opportunity to teach. If you have any questions, you can text me. You can send a message to Pastor Cooper's messenger, and I'd love to hear from you. You have any questions or any comments? Just give me a call, text, messenger, however you want to do it. See me at church on Sunday morning, 10 a.m., 2801 Southwest Pryor Road, Lee Summit, Missouri, at the Hawthorne Hills Elementary School. You can see us there. We start at 10 on time. I want to invite you to be our guest at High Praise Church. And when you come in and be our guest, you can say, Lady Cooper invited me to our to our to our 3rd year anniversary. It'll be Sunday, July 30th at 10 a.m. Come and be our guest there. We are celebrating our 3rd year anniversary, and we are so excited that God has given us these 3 years. And we want you to come and join in with us. Our guest pastor will be Pastor Victor Hicks and First Lady Prophetess Earlene Hicks, all the way from Austin, Texas, by way of East St. Louis, Illinois. So we want you to come and join with us. We would love to have you. We thank God for you. If you would like to share an offering with us, maybe you've been blessed by something that you heard or that you learned, or you just want us to say, hey, I want to sow into that ministry, we would love for you to do that. You can give online. You can go to High Praise Church KC. You can click on give, and it will take you to our secure giving portal. Follow the instructions there, or you can text to give. Say, for instance, you don't want to go online. You just want to use your phone and text. You can do that. You can text give, GIVE, the number 2, HPC. Text that to 77977. Click on the following, click and follow the prompts to give you that you get through your smartphone. Or you can send it through the mail. You can correspond with us. We have people who have been sending us offering through the mail, and we want you to know we appreciate it. We thank you for that. Or you can correspond with us, send us a letter or card or whatever at 5424 Northeast Holiday Drive, Lee Summit, Missouri, 64064. You can contact us again at Pastor Cooper's Messenger. Join us live again on Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. at Hawthorne Hills Elementary School in Lee Summit, Missouri. Come on and join us and have worship with us. We thank God for you. We appreciate you joining us tonight. God bless you, and we love you.